नाथ मरण मोहन जू की जाय। नित्यल्लभ विष्णु विष्णुपार अशुतर शत शिशुमार भक्तिवेदांत नारायण गोसाई महाराज श्री गुरुदेव की जय। नित्यल्लभ विष्णु विष्णुपार अशुतर शत शिशुमार भक्तिवेदांत वामन गोसाई महाराज की जय। नित्यल्लभ विष्णु विष्णुपार अशुतर शत शिशुमार भक्तिवेदांत स्वामी महाराज श्री प्रभुपाद की जय। नित्यल्लभ विष्णु विष्णुपार अशुतर शत शिशुमार भक्ति प्रज्ञान केशव गोसाई महाराज की जय। नित्यल्लभ विष्णु विष्णुपार अशुतर शत शिशुमार भक्ति सिद्धांत सरस्वती गोसाई प्रभुपाद की जय। नित्यल्लभ विष्णु महाभागवत श्री गौर किशोरदास बाबाजी महाराज की जय। नित्यल्लभ विष्णु वैष्णव सार्वभौम श्री जगन्नाथ दास बाबाजी महाराज की जय। श्री रूपानुगौरिया गुरु वर्ग की जय। श्री रूप सनातन भट्ट रघुनाथ श्री जीव गोपाल भट्टदास रघुनाथ शार गोसाई प्रभु की जय। श्री स्वरूप दामोदर राय रामानंदारी श्री गौर पार्षद वृंद की जय। नाम आचार्य श्री हरिदास ठाकुर की जय। प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरी गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री क्षेत्र मंडल गौरमंडल व्रजमंडल मथुरा वृंदावन धाम की जय। सर्व अभिष्ट विराट गिरिराज महाराज की जय। श्री राधा कुंद श्याम कुंद की जय। श्री यमुना देवी गंगा देवी की जय। श्री तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की जय। श्री भक्ति देवी की जय। श्री पूर्णमासी योग माया की जय। श्री गोपेश्वर महादेव की जय। श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय। अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय। समागत गौर भक्त वृंद की जय। श्री निताय ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय। श्री उद्धव गीत की जय। श्री विश्वनाथ चक्रवर्ती ठाकुर विरचित सārārtha-darśinī की जय। श्री भक्तिसिद्धांत सरस्वती गोसाई प्रभुपाद गौड़ीय भाष्य की जय। श्री निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। ओम ज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरुवे नमः। नमो ॐ विष्णुपदाय राधिकाय प्रियात्मने श्रीश्रीमद्भक्तिवेदान्त नारायणीति नामिने। नमो ॐ विष्णुपदाय कृष्णपृष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामिनिति नामिने। वाञ्छकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। नमो महावदन्याय कृष्णप्रेमप्रदायते कृष्णाय कृष्णचैतन्य नाम्ने गौरतिशे नमः। गुरवे गौरचन्द्राय राधिकाय तदालये कृष्णाय कृष्णभक्ताय तरभक्ताय नमो नमः। यं प्रव्रजन्तमनुपेतमपेतकृत्यं द्वैपायनो विरहकातर आजुहाव पुत्रेति तन्मयतया तरवोऽभिनेदुस्तं सर्वभूतहृदयं मुनिमानतोऽस्मि। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जयमुदीरयेत्। शृण्वतां स्वकथा कृष्ण पुण्यश्रवणकीर्तन हृदन्तस्थो ह्यभद्राणि विधुनोति सुहृत्सतं। नष्टप्रयेष्वभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवतसेवया भगवत्युत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टकी। तवैवास्मि न जीवामि त्वया विना इति विज्ञाय राधे त्वां नायमां शरणन्तिकम्। भक्त्या विहीना अपराधलक्षय क्षिप्ताष्टकामादितरङ्गमध्ये कृपामयि त्वां शरणं प्रपन्ना वृन्दे नमस्ते चरणारविन्दम्। भज श्रीकृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरी गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्ण हरे हरे Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Rohit Radhakrishnan ji. Dandavat Pranams. And Madhavi Didi. Hari Bol. I wonder where everybody else is. Alright, so I'm going to start. I just, right before I went live, I got this book, which Pradyumna shared some like pictures of this book, but I just found it quickly online, and it looks really, I don't know, it's made for memorizing all and like getting a bird's eye view of Srimad Bhagavatam. It looks very heady, and but um but yeah, I think there might be something useful in here. So let's see. Let's go over the 24 gurus, how it's explained in here. This is done by a devotee, what is his name? Sutapa Prabhu, who I think is now a sannyasi. I don't know his sannyasi name. 346. Let me find it. 346. Go to... Okay. Okay, so now we come to the Uddhava-gīta. Sorry guys, 1 second. Alright, let's do single page. In response to Uddhava's heartfelt request that Krishna take him along with him to, when he leaves this world, take him along with him to, the spiritual world, Krishna advised him to embrace renunciation and prepare to leave this world. Seeking guidance on how to best do this, Krishna began his explanations on a variety of topics, focusing in on the glory of pure devotional service. Particularly interesting passages include the instructions of the 24 gurus, the Bhikshu-gīta, and the Aila-gīta. There is also an exposition on Varnashram Dharma, as well as an explanation of various constituents of material nature. These profound teachings are famed as the Uddhava-gīta. So 24 gurus. Shukadeva Gosvāmī continued narrating the conversation between Krishna and Uddhava. Krishna confirmed he was indeed leaving the world. He urged Uddhava to embrace sannyas and plan his departure too, since Kali Yuga would soon begin. Uddhava, feeling himself very lowly and unqualified, requested an injection of transcendental knowledge to awaken his natural detachment. Krishna first explains how an intelligent person can observe the world around them and decipher powerful lessons to elevate their consciousness. To illustrate this, he narrated the story of an Avadut Brahmin who was wandering carefree and in deep spiritual ecstasy. When Maharaj Yadu questioned him on how he attained such an enlightened state, the Brahmana replied by delineating the 24 gurus through whom he received profound spiritual instruction. Some key lessons from these gurus are below. This is just very, very brief. So, the first guru was earth. One should remain undisturbed by aggressors and instead be absorbed in selfless service to others. From the air, he learned, though surrounded by material objects and situated within a material body, one must learn to remain aloof and untouched. From the sky, he learns, the individual soul and supersoul never mix with anything, nor can be divided by anything. From the water, he learns, saintly persons are purifying and pleasing, constantly traveling and enlightening others with the beautiful sounds of their words. From the fire, he learns, one should absorb things and yet remain untainted by them. Saintly persons, for example, can incinerate the karmic reactions of their followers and remain unaffected. From the moon, he learned, apparent changes in the body do not affect the soul, which means apparent changes in the body do not affect the soul, which remains constant and unchanged. From the sun, he learned, one should accept material objects and then utilize them at the appropriate time, remaining unsullied in the process. From the pigeon, he learned, one must be careful of excessive affection and attachment, which inevitably cause suffering. From the python, he learned, one should avoid excessive endeavors for material preservation, and instead remain focused on one's real spiritual interest. From the ocean, he learned, regardless of success or failure, prosperity or struggle, one must remain steady and serene. From the moth, he learned, one must not fall prey to the allurement of sense objects, of which attraction to the opposite sex is foremost. From the honeybee, he learned, one must guard against greed and overconsumption, only accepting what is required for his daily maintenance. From the elephant, he learned, one should carefully avoid exploiting and enjoying the opposite sex, lest they create more complexities for themselves. From the honey thief, if one acquires wealth and greedily stores it, he will inevitably be plundered. From the deer, he learned, saintly renunciates should avoid mundane entertainment in the form of singing, dance, or music. From the fish, he learned, failing to control the urges of the tongue will likely cause one's spiritual downfall. From Pingala, he learned, having unsuccessfully tried to enjoy the material world, one should develop a detachment from the illusory pursuits of family, friendship, and love. From the Kurara bird, he learned, by renouncing attachment and possessiveness, one experiences spiritual happiness. From the child, he learned, one who gives up concerns of home, children, and reputation can wander freely without any anxiety. From the young girl and bracelets, he learned, when people live communally, there is inevitably conflict, disagreement, and frivolous conversation. From the arrow maker, he learned, through yoga practice, one must steady the mind and focus it on the Supreme Lord without deviation. From the snake, he learned, one should avoid making complicated practical arrangements and rather accept a simple lifestyle for maintenance of the body. From the spider, he learns that the Lord utilizes his energies to create the cosmic manifestation, which eventually re-enters within himself again. From the wasp, he learns, whatever one constantly meditates on, that he will surely become. Then Shukadeva Gosvāmī continued narrating the instructions of Krishna to Uddhava. All forms of material enjoyment, even to the point of heavenly pleasures, are limited, temporary, and full of duality. In the futile pursuance of such experiences, one degrades himself more and more. The entangled spirit soul begins the journey back to purity after receiving transcendental knowledge from a spiritual master. By cultivating the mood and qualities of a true disciple, following transcendental instructions, and engaging one's propensities within the Varnashram system, one gains release from material entanglement. And yesterday we came across the very important verse, what is it? Labdva sadur labamidam bahusam bhavante. Oops, I forgot to open this in Kindle. Oh, let's see. Oh, and Dandavat pranams Indira Mataji, who will be watching this later on. And Pradyumna Prabhu, Mantramurti Mataji. Yeah, Rup Manjari. Oh, and Dandavat pranams Rup Manjari and Nitai. It's been a while. Yeah, you didn't realize most of these gurus taught to their fall down. Yeah, it's true, isn't it? Okay, let's just go through the last few verses that we read yesterday, like what we ended with. Okay. As each wife of a householder who has many wives tries to attract her husband for her own purpose, the tongue, genitals, sense of touch, belly, ears, nose, restless eyes, and working senses attracts the embodied soul towards their respective objects of enjoyment. I wonder where Shri Mataji is. The Supreme Lord first created, with the help of his energy, Maya Shakti, the trees, insects, animals, birds, reptiles, and so on, and yet he was not satisfied. Finally, the Lord created the human body, which offers the conditioned soul sufficient intelligence to realize him, and thus he became pleased. After creating various types of bodies, the Lord called for a cow and asked, "Do you know the Supreme Lord?" She replied, "No, I cannot understand who is the Supreme Lord." Then the Lord called a horse and asked it the same question. The horse gave a similar reply. Then the Lord called for human beings and asked them the same question. They replied, "We will know you by your mercy." Oh, whoops, that's not, I was thinking that this is, I don't remember. This is from the commentary. I got confused because it was bold. Sorry, guys. That was not a Srimad Bhagavatam verse. Okay. So first we read this verse that the Lord, with the help of his energy, created Maya Shakti, trees, insects, animals, birds, reptiles, and so on. But he was not satisfied. Finally, the Lord created a human body which offers a conditioned soul sufficient intelligence to realize him, and thus became pleased. And then comes this verse. Important verse. Labdva sadur labamidam bahusam bhavante manusha martadamanityam api hadhira turnam yatita napatera numritya yavan nishayasaya vishaya kalusarvata syat. After many lifetimes in lower species, one achieves the rare human form of life. Although temporary, the human body gives one the opportunity to attain the perfection of life. One who is actually intelligent should try to attain this perfection of life as long as the body remains healthy. After all, sense gratification is available in all the other species of life, whereas Krishna consciousness can only be cultivated by a human being. So don't waste time. Having learned these lessons from my spiritual masters, Devadatta says, I remain fixed in realization of the Supreme Lord and fully renounced and enlightened by realized spiritual knowledge. I wander over the earth without mundane association or false ego. Although God is one, the sages have described him in different manners. For this reason, one may not be able to gain a complete understanding of God from one ordinary spiritual master. The Supreme Lord said, having thus spoken to King Yadu, the wise Brahman accepted obeisances and worship from the king. Feeling satisfied within himself, he left exactly as he had come, after bidding the king farewell. O Uddhav, King Yadu, who is the forefather of our ancestors, became freed from all material attachments so that his mind became fixed in tranquility after hearing these statements of the Avadut. So that's how the chapter ends. Now, chapter 4, the nature of fruitive activity. Chapter summary. And Haribol Champak Didi and Sudevi Didi. Hare Krishna. In this chapter, Lord Krishna refutes this summary is written by Śrīla Bhaktisiddhānta Sarasvatī Ṭhākura. In this chapter, Lord Krishna refutes the doctrines of philosophers like Jaimini and describes to Uddhav how the conditioned soul can develop pure transcendental knowledge. One who is fully surrendered unto the Supreme Lord should follow the Vaishnava dharma that is described in the Pancharatra and other revealed scriptures. According to his natural qualities and work, one should follow the rules of Varnashram without duplicity. So-called knowledge that is received through one's material senses, mind, and intelligence is as useless as the dreams experienced by a person attached to sense gratification. Therefore, one should give up work for sense gratification and accept work as a matter of duty. When one has come to understand something of the truth of the self, he should give up material work performed out of duty and simply dedicate himself completely to the service of the bona fide spiritual master, who is the manifest representative of the personality of Godhead. A disciple should have firm faith in his spiritual master. He should be anxious to learn from him the science of the soul, and he should be free from envy and the tendency to indulge in nonsense talk. The spirit soul is separate from both the gross and subtle bodies. An embodied soul accepts different kinds of bodies according to his karma. Only a bona fide spiritual master is able to impart the knowledge of self-realization. By refuting the philosophies of Jaimini and others, Lord Sri Krishna explains that the embodied soul who has come in contact with segmented material time takes upon himself a perpetual chain of births and deaths, and is therefore forced to suffer the resultant happiness and distress. Thus, there is no possibility that one who is attached to the fruits of his material work can achieve any substantial goal in his life. The pleasures of heaven, which are achieved by performing sacrificial rituals, can be experienced for only a short time. After one's heavenly enjoyment is finished, one must return to this mortal sphere to partake of lamentation and suffering. On the path of materialism, there is certainly no uninterrupted happiness. Okay, 1 second. I'm just going to... Okay, 1 second. Let me just check to make sure I set up the mic. Okay. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha Mayoditeshvavahita Swardharmeshu Marashaya Varnashrama Kulacharam Akamatma Samacharit. The Supreme Lord said, "One who is surrendered unto me should tirelessly practice Vaishnava Dharma as prescribed by me in scriptures such as the Pancharatra. He should also perform his occupational duties according to the system of Varnashram, which is a favorable condition for accepting spiritual life." Sārārtha-darśinī commentary by Śrīla Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura. In this chapter, the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, the living entity's bondage as a result of their contact with matter, and the refutation of philosophers like Jaimini are described. Having given Uddhava many valuable lessons by narrating the story of an Avadut Brahman, the Supreme Lord now describes the process of sadhana. He says, "O Uddhava, you should follow the Varnashram Dharma and the devotional practices described by me in the scriptures like the Pancharatra." Gauḍīya Bhāṣya commentary by Bhaktisiddhānta Sarasvatī Gosvāmī Prabhupāda. The Supreme Lord said, "One should take shelter of me and work under my direction while following the system of Varnashram. If one gives up my shelter and engages in fruitive activities due to material attachment, he will never attain his ultimate welfare. When one follows Varnashram Dharma and family traditions simply for amassing pious merit rather than for engagement in my service, one is certainly misdirected and will never attain eternal benefit. Despite executing one's duties as prescribed by me in the Vedas and rejecting all prohibited activities, if one does not take shelter of me, then his endeavor is ultimately useless. On the other hand, if one engages in my devotional service without deviation, there is no necessity for performing religious duties prescribed in the Vedas. When my unalloyed devotees fail to observe all the rules and regulations prescribed in the Vedas, they should never be considered as misguided." Okay. Anviksheta vishuddhatma dehinam vishayatmanam guneshu tattvadhyanena sarvarambha viparyayam. A transcendentalist should see that because the conditioned souls who are dedicated to sense gratification have falsely accepted the objects of sense pleasure as reality, all of their endeavors are doomed to failure. Sārārtha-darśinī. How is it possible to give up material desires? The reply given here is that one should see the disastrous results obtained by materialistic people who consider the temporary manifestations of this world to be ultimate reality. How is it possible to give up material desires? We should see the disastrous result obtained by materialistic people who consider the temporary manifestations of this world to be ultimate reality. By such an observation, one will certainly become detached from the aspiration to enjoy such objects that will disappear in due course of time. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. When the conditioned souls come to realize the utter futility of their endeavors to enjoy the temporary manifestations of this world, they certainly become detached. Suptasya vishaya loko dhyayato va manoratha nanatmakatvad vipalas tata bhedatmadhir gunai. A sleeping person may see many objects of sense gratification in his dreams, but such things are merely creations of his mind and are thus of no benefit to him. Similarly, one who is asleep to his spiritual identity sees many sense objects in this world, but they are all creations of the Lord's illusory potency and have no permanent existence. One who meditates upon the temporary objects of the senses, therefore, uselessly engages his intelligence. Sārārtha-darśinī. Because the results of material work are temporary, they cannot provide one with lasting benefit and are thus considered useless. Materialistic activities can never bring one to the perfection of life or free one from the pangs of material existence. Material intelligence, when impelled by the senses, strongly desires sense gratification. Material intelligence strongly desires sense gratification when impelled by the senses, and thus separates one from one's real self-interest. Such diverted intelligence will never be able to understand the absolute truth, the personality of Godhead Sri Krishna. The devotees of the Lord, however, fix their intelligence upon Him by meditating upon His. They fix their intelligence upon Him by meditating upon His form, qualities, pastimes, and devotees. In this way, their intelligence is never separated from the absolute truth, as stated in Bhagavad-gīta 2:41. Vyavasayatmika buddhir ekeha kurunandana bahushaka hyanantascha buddhayo vyavasayinam. Those who are on this path are resolute in purpose, and their aim is one. O beloved child of the Kurus, the intelligence of those who are irresolute is many-branched. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. The sense objects observed in one's dreams are of no value, just as the objects seen in the waking state are ultimately useless because they are temporary. Yeah, so there's actually not so much difference between dreams and real life because both are temporary. Nivritam karma seveta pravritam mat parastyajit jigyasayam sampravrito nadriyet karma chodanam. One who has fixed his mind on me, making me his goal of life, should give up activities of sense gratification and should instead engage in the regulated practice of devotional service. On the other hand, when one is fully endeavoring for self-realization, he has no need to follow the scriptural injunctions regarding fruitive activities. Sārārtha-darśinī. A materialistic person does whatever is pleasing to his senses. One who acts according to religious principles regulates his material enjoyment in a way that is prescribed in the scriptures. Those who are advancing toward the transcendental platform, however, desist from all activities of sense gratification. In Bhagavad-gīta 6, verses 3 to 4, it is stated, Arurukshor muner yogam karma karanam uchate yogarudhasya tasyaiva shama karanam uchate. For one who is a neophyte in the eightfold yoga system, work is said to be the means. And for one who is already elevated in yoga, cessation of material activities is said to be the means. Yada hinendriyarteshu na karmasvanusajjate sarva sankalpa sannyasi yogarudastadocchate. This is still the commentary. A person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. There is no need for those who are engaged in the service of the Supreme Lord to perform fruitive activities with a desire to enhance their worldly enjoyment. One should remain aloof from the activities of sense gratification and instead engage in unalloyed devotional service to the Supreme Lord. Engagement in devotional service to the Supreme Lord is real freedom from material desires. The paths of sense gratification and renunciation are always full of contradictions, whereas the service of the Supreme Lord is the doubtless path of perfection. Yaman abhikshnam sevita niyamam. Yaman abhikshnami seveta niyamam nat matpara kvachit mar abhigyam gurum shantam upasita maratmakam. One who has surrendered unto me, accepting me as the goal of life, should follow all the rules that forbid sinful activities. One should also try his best to follow all the sub-religious principles, such as those dealing with cleanliness. One should approach a bona fide spiritual master who is intimately related to me, and who is thus very peaceful and is none different from me. Wow, this is a great verse. Sārārtha-darśinī. One should very carefully control his senses and follow the scriptural injunctions for morality, such as non-violence and cleanliness. These rules will be more fully described later on. One who is intelligent should faithfully render service to a self-realized spiritual master who has full knowledge of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. It is the eternal duty of everyone to worship his spiritual master, who is always engaged in the service of the Supreme Lord. The devotees of the Lord are always engaged in devotional service, which is concomitantly inclusive of activities such as yam and niyam. If one is indifferent to the service of Lord Hari, one's Guru, and the Vaishnavas, one can never achieve eternal benefit. Text 6. Amanyamatsaro daksho nirmamo dridaso hrida asatvarortha jigyasur anasuyur amogavak. A disciple of the spiritual master should be freed from false pride, false ego, and laziness. He should give up all sense of proprietorship over the objects of the senses, even his wife and children, and he should have firm faith and affection for his spiritual master. He should be steady, always desiring advancement in spiritual understanding, and he should not envy anyone and should avoid useless talk. Sārārtha-darśinī. The duties of a disciple are being described. The disciple should not expect any respect for himself. He should not envy anyone, and he should be expert and free from material attachment. He should have firm faith in the spiritual master, as well as his worshipable Lord. He should always be eager to engage in devotional service and thus attain his goal of life. One who wants to advance in spiritual understanding should not find fault in others, and should always avoid idle talk. Jayapatya griha kshetra svajana dravinadishu udasina samam pashyan sarveshvartam ivatmana. A sincere disciple is equal to everyone. He should remain detached from his wife, children, household, property, relatives, wealth, and so on. Sārārtha-darśinī. How can one be without a sense of proprietorship? For example, a wealthy materialist will feel equally attached as the proprietor of all his various assets. But if some are taken away by thieves or the government, he gives up attachment for them. An intelligent person should understand that everything he possesses will not remain for long, and thus he should cultivate a mood of detachment. The son of Chitraketu said in Srimad Bhagavatam 6:16, verses 6 to 7, Yatha vastuni panyani himadini tatastata. Yatha vastuni panyani himadini tatastata paryatanti nareshvenam jiva yonishu kartrishu nityasartasya sambandho hyanito drishyate nrishu yavad yasa hi sambandho mamatvam tavadevahi. So the son of Chitraketu said, just as gold and other commodities are continually transferred from one place to another in due course of purchase and sale, so the living entity, as a result of his fruitive activities, wanders throughout the entire universe, being injected into various bodies and different species of life by one kind of father after another. Relatively few living entities are born in the human species, and others are born as animals. Although both are living entities, the relationships they establish are impermanent. An animal may remain in the custody of a human being for some time, and then the same animal may be transferred to the position of other human beings. As soon as the animal goes away, the former proprietor no longer has a sense of ownership. As long as the animal is in his possession, he certainly has an affinity for it. But as soon as the animal is sold, the affinity is lost. As far as the spiritual master and the Lord are concerned, one should simply keep firm faith at their lotus feet. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. A devotee of the Lord should not consider himself to be the enjoyer of his wife, children, house, land, friends, and other possessions, knowing them to be intended for the Lord's service, just like himself. He should not try to demand respect from others with a desire to enjoy fame and reputation. He should become free from envy, laziness, and material attachment. He should be inquisitive, devoid of pride, truthful, and steady in his determination. Vilakshana sulakshukshmar dehar atmekshita svadrik yatagnir daruno dahyar dahakonya prakashakaha. Just as a blazing fire is different from the wood it burns to provide illumination, so the knower within the material body is different from the body itself, which is pervaded by the consciousness of the soul. It should be firmly understood that the spirit, soul, and the body have different characteristics because they are two distinct entities. Sārārtha-darśinī. One should not maintain the false egoistic conception of I and mine in relation to the material body. The gross and subtle bodies covering the living entities are made of the material elements, but the spirit soul is transcendental to matter. The spirit soul possesses the transcendental qualities of the Lord, but in minute quantity. In this verse, the soul is described as self-enlightened. Because the conditioned soul is enlightened by the mercy of the Lord, one may question how this can be. Although the Supreme Personality of Godhead certainly furnishes the living entity with consciousness, the living entity, being endowed with the potency of the Lord, has himself the capacity to revive and expand his pure consciousness. In this regard, the soul is compared to gold and silver, which, although having no power of self-illumination, brightly reflects the rays of the sun. Thus, it may be said that gold and silver possess the power to illuminate, although not independently. This verse gives an example to illustrate how the spirit soul is distinct from the body. Just as fire is distinct from the wood it burns, the soul is distinct from the body it illuminates with consciousness. In the conditional state, the spirit soul is compared to fire that is dormant within wood. When the conditioned soul is enlightened on the strength of his spiritual when the conditioned soul is enlightened on the strength of his spiritual knowledge, he can burn his ignorance to ashes, just as fire burns wood. That's an interesting, that's a good example. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Just as fire is separate from the wood it burns, one is that which burns, and the other is that which is burnt. So just in that same way, the spirit soul is distinct from the gross body and the subtle mind. He is self-manifest and minutely independent. Text 9. Nirodhotpatyanu nanatvam tat kritan gunan antapravishta adhatta evam deha gunam para. Just as fire manifested from wood takes different shapes according to the condition of the fuel, the embodied soul enters various material bodies and thus accepts varieties of bodily characteristics. Sārārtha-darśinī. Although fire may be sometimes visible and sometimes not, the element fire always exists. Similarly, the soul may appear within a body and then depart, but still the soul is eternal. It is a mistake to impose material conditions upon the spirit soul who has nothing to do with the material body. As fire is sometimes blazing, sometimes great, sometimes small, and sometimes extinguished, the spirit soul is sometimes born, sometimes in the body of Brahma, sometimes in the body of an ant, and sometimes departs from the body at death. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Fire, although separate from the object it burns, appears in various ways, as big, small, blazing, or extinguished, according to the condition of the fuel. In the same way, the spirit soul, being averse to the Supreme Lord, identifies himself with his gross and subtle bodies, although he is distinct from them in eternal. Yoso gunar virachito deho yam purushasya hi sangsarastan nibandho yam pungso vidya chiratmana. The subtle and gross material bodies are created by the material modes of nature, which are creations of the illusory energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Material existence occurs when the living entity falsely accepts the qualities of the gross and subtle bodies as being his self. This illusory state, however, can be destroyed by real knowledge. Sārārtha-darśinī. The question may arise that since fire is produced from wood, and fire has never been seen independently of any fuel, it may be assumed that the existence of the soul is dependent upon the gross and subtle material bodies. The answer is that only through the Supreme Personality of Godhead's knowledge potency, vidya, can one clearly understand the nature of the living entity. By such real knowledge, one may cut material existence to pieces, and even in this lifetime experience spiritual reality. Our material existence is an artificial imposition. By the Lord's inconceivable potency of nescience, the qualities of gross and subtle material forms are imposed upon the living being, and because of misidentification with the body, he initiates a series of illusory activities. When, by the mercy of the Lord, the conditioned souls are freed from the material conception of life, having revived their original consciousness, they become free from material bondage. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Those living entities who are averse to the Supreme Lord forget their constitutional position and become conditioned by material existence, so that they consider their gross and subtle bodies as their selves. However, a pure spirit soul is not bewildered by material existence, which keeps the rebellious souls under a spell of illusion. Let me just check the comments really quick. Okay. Tasmaj jagyasayatmanam atmastam kevalam param sangamya nirased etar vastu buddhim yathakramam. Therefore, after careful consideration, one should approach the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is the cause and effect of everything, while renouncing the false conception that this world is an independent reality. Sārārtha-darśinī. The spirit soul is covered by gross and subtle bodies. One should understand that the spirit soul is completely distinct from these gross and subtle material bodies. Gradually, on the strength of one's sadhan, one should rise above the conception that the material body is the self. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. When one comes to the platform of self-realization, he should inquire about his duty and then dedicate himself to the service of the Supreme Lord. While engaged in devotional service, one should remain detached from thoughts of enjoying the objects of the senses, which are all creations of Maya. It is only due to a lack of inquisitiveness that a foolish person fails to attain knowledge of the absolute truth. Acharyor ranir adyasyar antevasyuttarayani tatsandhanam pravachanam vidyasandhi sukavaha. The spiritual master is compared to the lower kindling. The spiritual master is compared to the lower kindling wood. The disciple is compared to the upper kindling wood, and the instructions imparted by the spiritual master are compared to the wood placed between these two. The fire of knowledge that is produced by the interaction of these three destroys the darkness of ignorance and gives happiness to both the spiritual master and the disciple. Interesting example. Sārārtha-darśinī. The knowledge received from the spiritual master is capable of burning ignorance and its effects. The knowledge from the spiritual master is capable of burning ignorance and its effects to ashes. When two sticks are rubbed together, the friction produces fire. Similarly, the spiritual master imparts instructions to his disciple, and this knowledge destroys the disciple's ignorance, burning his desire for material enjoyment to ashes. Burning his desire for material enjoyment to ashes. Knowledge of self-realization is produced by... now we're reading the Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Knowledge of self-realization is produced by linking the living entities, who are conditioned by Maya, with a spiritual master, who is full in knowledge of the absolute truth. Just as fire is produced when one rubs two sticks, the knowledge of self-realization is attained by the disciple who is under the shelter of the lotus feet of the spiritual master. Vaisharadi sati vishuddha buddhir... Oh, is this a different meter? Oh, it is. What meter is it? Okay. Vaisharadi sati vishuddha buddhir dhunoti mayam gunasamprasutam gunangscha sandahya yaratmamayetat swayam cha shamyatyasamidyatagni. By submissively hearing from a bona fide spiritual master, one receives perfect understanding that dispels the illusion of material existence, which is due to the influence of the three modes of material nature. Ultimately, the quest for perfect knowledge ceases when one has become fully satisfied on the spiritual platform. Sārārtha-darśinī. Perfect knowledge comes from the expert spiritual master, and it removes the bondage to material existence created by attachments to the gross and subtle bodies. After establishing one on a transcendental platform, where one becomes absorbed in thoughts of the Lord, the fire of knowledge becomes extinguished, just as fire is extinguished after all the fuel is consumed. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. Just as fire is extinguished when there is no more supply of fuel, similarly, a disciple who receives transcendental knowledge from the expert spiritual master is able to free himself from the clutches of the three modes of material nature. Only then the intelligence is purified, and one becomes inclined towards the Supreme Lord. Ataisham karma kartrinam bhoktrinam sukha dukhayo nanatvam atanityatvam lokakala gamatmanam. Whenever you see this E with this thing on it, it's supposed to be a Ri. There's some weird thing. Manyase sarvabhavanam sangsta yotpattakiyata tattar akriti bhedena jayate vidyate chadhi evam apyanga sarvesham dehinam deha yogata kalavayavata santi bhava janmadayo sakrit. My dear Uddhav, I have thus imparted perfect knowledge unto you. There are other philosophers, however, who arrive at a different conclusion. They say that the conditioned souls engage in fruitive activities because they are the enjoyers of the happiness and unhappiness that are derived from the results of their work. According to this understanding, the cosmic manifestation, including the time, the scriptures, and the souls, are transforming in a perpetual cycle. Just as the objects of this world are constantly transforming, so knowledge based on such objects is also impermanent and ever-changing. My dear Uddhav, if this philosophy is accepted, there will be no escape from the cycle of repeated birth and death, accompanied by old age and disease, as the living beings accept material bodies that are subject to the influence of time. 1 second. Sārārtha-darśinī. Lord Krishna says, My dear Uddhav, in the instructions I have given you, I clearly indicated the ultimate goal of life. There are those who would not agree with my teachings, however, such as the followers of Jaimini. If you are inclined to accept their materialistic philosophy instead of my instructions, then listen to what I have to say about it. According to the philosophy of Jaimini, the living entity is constitutionally the performer of fruitive activities, and such actions are the causes of his happiness and distress. The energy or nature that forms the worlds we live in, the time under which we are controlled, the revealed scriptures that lead us on the path of advancement, and the subtle bodies that are the medium through which we experience happiness and distress, although constantly being transformed, remain eternally. The living being need not renounce sense gratification, either due to understanding the temporary nature of existence, or by seeing the world as an illusory creation of Maya. According to such a materialistic philosophy, the objects of this world, even the bodies of beautiful women, are temporary manifestations of an eternal nature. Thus, creation, maintenance, and destruction are the three phases of eternal existence. By executing fruitive rituals that are prescribed by the Vedas, one can understand his aristocratic position, which affords him the possession of women and wealth, birth after birth. In this way, one can go on enjoying sense gratification eternally. Such philosophers say that the universe eternally exists in some form or another, and thus imply that there is no need to suppose that there is a God who created it. They claim that the cosmic manifestation is therefore real and not illusory. In this way, they defy the conception of an eternal soul having an eternal spiritual form, which is now covered by matter. They say that knowledge is derived from sense perception and not coming from some kind of absolute truth, and therefore knowledge itself is subject to change, just as the objects that it perceives. They say that knowledge is derived from sense perception and not coming from some kind of absolute truth, and therefore knowledge itself is subject to change, just as are the objects of that it perceives. In this way, materialistic philosophers conclude that although the material nature is unlimitedly transformable, it still exists eternally. By thinking in this way, such persons are more inclined to follow the path of advancing material enjoyment instead of the path of renunciation. They see liberation as a state of pure consciousness without any activity or variety. Indeed, many such philosophers feel that liberation is an abnormal state of existence, because the liberated souls would be without any activity or enjoyment. Even if we accept for the sake of arguments that their philosophy is correct, we would still have to conclude that a path of regulated sense enjoyment would never provide ultimate happiness, but instead would simply award countless miseries. For this reason, even from a materialistic point of view, detachment is in the living being's self-interest. Okay, text 17. Tatrapi karmanam kartur asvatantriyam cha lakshyate bhoktuscha dukasukhayo konvarto vivashan bhajet. Although the person who engages in fruitive activities hopes to become eternally happy, it is practically seen that materialists are mostly miserable and only rarely actually satisfied. This proves that the conditioned souls are not independent, nor are they in the control of their destiny. When a person is always under someone else's control, how can he expect to when somebody is under somebody else's control, how can he expect to get anywhere by acting independently? Sārārtha-darśinī. It is practically seen that when one performs fruitive activities, he is still under the control of destiny, and thus rarely achieves the fulfillment of his desires. If there was actual freedom, then who would have to suffer miseries? What intelligent person would allow himself to suffer the miseries of birth, death, old age, and disease? Therefore, the conclusion is that the living entities are dependent upon a higher authority. Gauḍīya Bhāṣya. The performer of activities enjoys happiness or distress, being under the control of time. In modern times, inventions have been created to eliminate the inconveniences of life. But the maintenance and production of such conveniences has proven to be unbearably inconvenient for hundreds of millions of people throughout the world. Only the most foolish person will propose that there is no superior controller, and that one can achieve favorable results simply by expert performance of material activities. Okay, I'm going to end with this verse. Na dehinam sukham kinchid vidyate vidusham api tata cha dukham murdhanam vrittahankaranam param. It is observed within this world that sometimes even a learned person feels distressed, whereas a great fool may feel happy. Therefore, it is simply a manifestation of false ego to think that by the expert performance of karma, one can achieve happiness. Sārārtha-darśinī. It can be argued that a person could continuously perform pious activities, avoiding all sinful acts, and thus never suffer, because misery is caused by acting sinfully. The answer is that you will never find anyone in this world who is always happy or who is always distressed. Sometimes it is seen that pious men are in a miserable condition and sinful men are happy. The conclusion is that even pious men sometimes perform forbidden acts. And even sinful men sometimes perform unknown pious activities, such as traveling to a holy place or serving a saintly person. Gauḍīya Bhaṣya. So we have to be so careful who we how we judge people. The living entities who are averse to Krishna are always under the control of the three modes of material nature. Because of this, whether they are in knowledge or in ignorance, they do not become lastingly happy. Alright, I'm ending here. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Ram Ram, Hare Hare, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Hari Bol, Nitai Gaur, Hari Bol. Jai Shri Guru Gauranga Gandharvika Giridhari Shri Radha Vinod Bihari Ju ki Jai, Shri Govinda Gopinath Maran Mohan Ju ki Jai, Nityalila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashata Shishimad Bhaktivedanta Narayan Gosvāmī Maharaj Śrīla Gurudev ki Jai, Nityalila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashata Shishimad Bhaktivedanta Vaman Gosvāmī Maharaj ki Jai, Nityalila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashata Shishimad Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Śrīla Prabhupāda ki Jai, Nityalila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashata Shishimad Śrīla Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki Jai. Sorry guys, I'm falling asleep. Where was I? Nityalila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashata Shishimad Śrīla Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Śrīla Prabhupada ki Jai, Nityalila Pravishtam Vishnupad Ashtatarashata Shishimad Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Gosvāmī Maharaj ki Jai, Nityalila Pravishta Om Vishnupad Ashtatarashata Shishimad Bhaktisiddhānta Sarasvatī Gosvāmī Prabhupāda ki Jai, Nityalila Pravishta Maha Bhagavat Śrīla Gaurkishora Babaji Maharaj ki Jai, Nityalila Pravishta Vaishnav Sarvabhauma Śrīla Jagannath Das Babaji Maharaj ki Jai, Shri Rupa Gauḍīya Guru Varga ki Jai, Shri Rupa Sanatan Bhatta Raghunath, Shri Jeev Gopal Bhatta Das Raghunath Shāra Gosvāmī Prabhu ki Jai, Shri Sarup Damodar Rai Ramanandari Shri Gaur Parshad Vrinda ki Jai, Namacharya Śrīla Haridas Ṭhākura ki Jai, प्रेम से कहो श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर शिवासरी गौर भक्त वृंद की जय, श्री क्षेत्र मंडल गौर मंडल ब्रज मंडल मथुरा वृंदावन धाम की जय, सर्व अभिष्ट प्रदाता गिरिराज महाराज की जय, श्री राधा कुंड श्याम कुंड की जय, श्री यमुना देवी गंगा देवी की जय, श्री तुलसी महारानी वृंद देवी की जय, श्री भक्ति देवी की जय, श्री पूर्णमासी योगमाया की जय, श्री गोपेश्वर महादेव की जय, श्री हरिनाम संकीर्तन की जय, अनंत कोटि वैष्णव वृंद की जय, समागत गौर भक्त वृंद की जय, श्री निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे ग्रंथराज श्रीमद् भागवतम की जय, श्री उद्धव गीत की जय, श्री विश्वनाथ चक्रवर्ती ठाकुर की जय, Sārārtha-darśinī वृत्ति की जय, श्री भक्तिसिद्धांत सरस्वती गोस्वामी प्रभुपाद की जय, गौड़ीय भाष्य की जय, श्री निताय गौर प्रेमानंदे हरि हरि बोल। ओम वृंदाय तुलसी देवाय प्रियाय केशवाश्च कृष्ण भक्ति प्रददेवी सत्यवताय नमो नमः। पंचकल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। Dandavat pranams everybody. So we will complete the Uddhava-gīta chapter 4, the nature of fruitive activity, tomorrow. And Pradyumna Prabhu is asking, is today Hanuman Jayanti? I don't know. We have Hanuman Bhakta living here, where I am right now. I'll ask him. Hey Shiva, did he hear anything about Hanuman Jayanti? I don't know. Pradyumna Prabhu was just mentioning it. We were planning on going to Murari Gupta's Shripat today. But Shivas doesn't think it's today. So, oh, he says tomorrow. No, wait. Oh, he says tomorrow. Yeah, I don't know. Shivas will find out. That's cool. Okay, so tomorrow is also. Oh, really? Tomorrow is the Ras Yatra of Lord Balaram, also the Vasanti Ras of Krishna, and it is the appearance of Shyamananda Prabhu and Shri Vangshi Vadarananda Ṭhākura. That's all tomorrow. And then in 6 days is the appearance day of Srila Bhakti Kumud Santa Goswami Maharaj and the disappearance day of Shri Akinchana Krishna Das Babaji Maharaj. And then in 7 days from now is Shri Abhiram Thakur. Alright. Thank you so much for joining. I'll see you all tomorrow. Jai Shri Radhe.